website, LarryTheGM.com. All right. So, guys, that's the guide. Right now, you can literally click on these links, and you're going to see some of the things that we pushed out this morning, and then one that we worked on this afternoon. Let's go to this morning's article, because I think this was done strategically, guys. Because I thought even by right now we would have heard whether or not James Click still had his job. And you may jump in and tell me, hey Larry, they've announced it. He's gone. Won't surprise me one bit. So, how do we grade James Click as an Astros GM? All right, so it's the off season. That blue font's telling you go back to the off season outline. Follow it there. Here we'll have the video right there, and where the red font is. How would you rate James Click as an Astros GM? Right. Start off with a poll. Now I've got a few people in the room with me. You guys tell me, how would you rate James Click as an Astros GM? A, B, C, or D? I'll let you guys tell me that as we go. So, what I'll say about this, and I got some feedback, and maybe there's one more thing I should add to this. So, Alberto, you're a C. Johnny, you're a B. Maybe I can help you, Alberto, to maybe if you haven't read this yet, Alberto, maybe you already have, and say, Larry, no, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. It's a C. Brandon, you're an A minus. I'm kind of at a B myself. All right, and you'll see that as we go through this. So here we are. Let's talk about major duties of a GM of a team, and there's one other one I'm going to add to this article, which is building the scouting system back. That's something that Luno just pretty much tore down and was completely based on more analytical methods. And Click has built the scouting system back in place, such that the Astros, I think, are a much more balanced scouting program. Where they look at analytics, they're very dedicated to their analytics, but they also send scouts out to look at these things. So let's talk about the other duties. Execute trades to help the Astros. I'm not going to go through these trades one by one. They're in the article, but you see the trades that have occurred since James Click took over as the Astros GM. There weren't a lot of moves in 2020 just because it was the COVID year, but you see the moves after the 2020, at the trade deadline of 2020. Actually, that's like before the season started. You can see the moves in 2021. You can see the moves in 2022, and so I will say that there's some of these trades. Let me say something that I don't necessarily say in this article. When I looked at the Astros trades until this year, I kind of always question, like, what's the signature move that the Astros made with their trade? Now, I will tell you that the trade that they made for Kendall Graveman and Rafael Montero, where they sent Joe Smith and Abraham Toro to the Seattle Mariners, that trade was probably a C or a B minus for me, because I thought Rafael Montero wasn't a significant piece. But Rafael Montero has been by far the most valuable piece of that deal, and that makes that trade an A. I had similar feelings about the Phil Maton for Miles Straw deal. I've not ever been that big of a Phil Maton fan. Any of you guys have been in Twitter Spaces with me, or followed things I've said, I've always considered Phil Maton to be the jack in the box of all major league baseball player, relief pitcher, where you turn the crank on the jack in the box, turn the crank. Sometimes there's nothing happens, you get out of the inning without any runs. Sometimes you turn the crank and boom, the jack in the box pops out runs. Now, to be fair, you could probably make that analogy for most relief pitchers. It just felt like some days that Phil Maton has it and some he doesn't. And so that's been always my concern about that. But here's the deal. That trade is way less important about Phil Maton as it is Yanier Diaz. Yanier Diaz is ready to play for the Astros, and so that that trade, and Miles Straw is nowhere near as productive that this year as he was last year. So I think to be fair to that deal, it's a B. So you can see my grades. Now, I will tell you when the Mancini and Vasquez deals happened, kind of the reverse. I I thought those were A level deals. Wrote so on my website. You can find those articles and you can find out why I thought those were A deals. Neither one has been nearly as productive for the Astros as they should have been. They both were productive as they were where they came from for about 3 to 3.5 weeks, and then after 3.5 weeks, both of their productivity just cratered. Now you have to decide why you think that happened. I have my own opinions, but that's the story of those deals. Um, so those are the deals that the Astros have made. I would think that, in my opinion, the best deal the Astros that James Click has made, when you consider how productive Rafael Montero has been, it was that deal. Because Kendall Graveman was a good relief pitcher. He was a setup man for the Astros. He was just terrible against left-handed hitters. Um, but the Kendall Graveman and Rafael Montero for Joe Smith and Abraham Toro, that's a tremendous deal. Now, Alberto, that's actually the reason I don't think it's fair to criticize James Click for either one of the Mancini or Vasquez deals, because they both came here as like Vasquez was like a 76% starter in Boston, and they would even play him at first base. They even DH'd him in previous years to keep that rate up at 77% or 76% starter. Um, and Mancini was like a 90% plus player. And I mean, I wrote this in the article, guys, about those deals a couple weeks ago or a week ago. My opinion about those deals is that we imploded those players by lack of playing time, and then we're in the postseason and we don't have the players that we traded for because we never played them. You may think that's unfair to Dusty, guys. The thing I want to get into about that is Dusty that James Click made a trade for Contreras. It was Urquidy for Contreras, straight up. That's a very fair deal to both teams. Now, you may think, well, Urquidy's a great pitcher. He's been great in the postseason. How many innings did Urquidy pitch this postseason, guys? There's a reason. He was like the 12th or 13th best pitcher on their postseason staff. So we traded that for a guy that would have been the starter at catcher. That was the problem Dusty had. Dusty went behind James Click's back and went to the owner and got that deal sabotaged and vetoed. And guys, that is I if we do not bring James Click back, or James Click decides he's had enough, I'm telling you that action right there may prevent the Astros from getting a top level GM, because I don't know of a GM that's going to want to deal with that kind of micromanaging, second guessing, and political mess with his manager. And quite honestly, it is saying that there's not a trust in the general manager. There's way more trust in the manager. And I you can say, well, Dusty's had all this experience, he should know. Number one, I think Dusty was wrong about that, because I think he's working from a paradigm of assuming that Maldonado is a defensive superstar, and he's just not anymore. And I've proven that multiple times during the season. And so you may not like what I just said there, but that's the truth. And so um, the realities for this general manager situation is that I think James Click made some really good trades. I think he made a really good trade that would have made this even an easier run to the postseason. And Dusty, knowing that his catcher was struggling, and to find out later that catcher late in August, had a broken hand and a sports hernia, he still pushed out that player to play like 70% of the games and didn't get Vasquez ready to be in the postseason and therefore diminished the value of the Vasquez trade, I think is well, I probably can't say the words I would describe it here on the YouTube channel. Just just point blank. So I think people, I mean, one of the complaints I've heard about I Pablo, I just don't believe in stuff like that. If this team chemistry was so weak that Contreras coming in and being an all-star level catcher would somehow break the culture of the team, and if Dusty Baker actually took, or this team traded for Contreras, and Dusty Baker was still as stubborn, then that is dumb. That's dumb. Because Maldonado was not a good catcher this year. And I'm sorry if you don't agree with me on that, but I've written about it like 7 times and proven it. So the hold on to saying, well, we didn't need help at catcher because we've got Maldonado. What the first base and catcher spots in this roster are the 2 blackest holes and the 2 lowest valued positions on this whole team. This team could have been the greatest baseball team that ever existed. And that is just, it's crazy. It's crazy. And so I think people are just really, really, really not understanding what this clubhouse is about. If they think that, and if they think that Maldonado would, if he loves this team so much, that he would have undercut this team if they decided they needed some help when he has a broken hand and a sports hernia. Come on, come on. All right, so that's my view on the trades over the Click era. I mean, I think overall I would give Click about a B on those trades. There's some of them that haven't been great. Most of them have been pretty good. Yeah, but that's these old school, and that's part of the problem, Paulo. I'm just going to tell you straight up. So the free agents. So the free agents, the signings Dusty's made, and this likewise is a similar mixed bag of experience here. There's been some free agents that James Click has signed that were really good, and I would point to Ryan Stanek as probably the superstar James Click signing. Going out and negotiating with Justin Verlander after his contract was over. So what I did not put in this table was extensions in the table. What I did put in this table is if that player had gone to free agency, um, Justin Verlander wasn't officially a free agent, and this team got him and negotiated with him for the deal that he signed, which was actually a pretty team friendly deal. But then to balance that, there was the Jay Odorizzi deal. Now, guys, when this team signed Jake Odorizzi in March of 2021, they were panicked. They believed they didn't have enough pitching depth, which is kind of funny to think of through as you look in a 2022 filter, right? But some of the pitchers that we think of as near superstars right now were still very young and not inexperienced. This front office and James Click also signed Nico Goodrum, which at the time I thought was a pretty interesting lottery pick type of thing. And it just didn't work out. To be fair, Nico Goodrum was constantly played against the split of the platoon, which he was most valuable. He was constantly put in position of batting against right-handed pitchers, which Nico Goodrum has been horrible at his entire career. Yeah, right, Johnny. Because they thought Framber had broken his finger, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, it was a disaster." They didn't have they didn't have any trust in the young pitchers that had actually pitched fairly well the year before in the shortened season. There was panic, and they got somebody they thought could create innings. Now, when what James Click had to do was like be very creative with the structure of that contract, which actually leads into the trade that happened with Odorizzi this year. And you know, it, it basically essentially we're trading one bad contract for 2 years for one bad contract for 1 year. And so it was like actually a good deal he made to fix the problem. But that there you go. So these are the free agent signings for the Astros. And to be honest with you, I give Click's free agents about a C plus or 6 out of 10. So now, what James Click has done, what I would say, phenomenally well. And you have to kind of remember where this team was when he took over. The team was over the CBT the year before James Click got here, significantly. Um, it was beset by COVID. The cheating scandal had hit, and there were massive financial negatives hitting this team. And after 2020, the Astros and this front office, that James Click, they made the decision with Jim Crane to let Springer go, right? And the fans were really upset about that. Turned out that their answer for that, their plan for that, was to have Miles Straw and Tucker. So they basically turned from Springer and Reddick and a little bit of Tucker the year before into Tucker full time and Miles Straw at the beginning of the 2020 season. In 2021, Click barely got that team under the I'm sorry, for the 2021 season. That was their plan. They barely got under the CBT and had the structured order Rizzi real unfavorably for 22 and 23 to do that. Before 22, before this season, Click made the bold decision again to not do what would probably be the easy GM move if the owner was willing, and they chose not to sign Correa. Now, I think Click was, I think um, Jim Crane was a big part of that. But, you know, Click did not resign Correa, and they took the huge PR hit for that. I think people to this day, there's some hatred for Click because he didn't sign Correa and he didn't sign Springer. But you can't argue with the results. They took they literally in that process, it's almost like they stopped talking to Correa because they had data from the Winter League, and they believed, similarly to what we wrote before the last season, that Pena was going to be really good, and it wasn't worth the $30 million that they were going to have to invest in Correa plus for a long-term deal, or at least at that point, it looked like that. There was even I questioned about that. Like, are we really going to put this much pressure on Jeremy Pena? I mean, I think he's going to be good, but how good do we really expect him to be? They were right about that. James Click has done an excellent job of getting financial constraints built in. I think, Johnny, as you were kind of referencing, he's leveraging the Tampa Bay way, or the Tampa uh, Bay Rays, um, their system and the way that the philosophies about players at age, getting big contracts and stuff like that. And you can't blame them. You cannot you have to just tip your hat to the way this front office and James Click managed the contract. So now here's the deal. What at the end of the day, what's James Click's biggest point was that his job is to win championships or to lead this team to win championships. Now, as the Astros GM, James Click has led them to a 599 record. That includes, the subpar regular season in the 2020 year. Okay, so some people can say the same thing about Dusty Baker, right? So the hardest thing in evaluating Click is that given the payroll and the talent here, some people are going to say, well, what was his big move, Larry? What did he do? And then, that was never James Click's role. Like, that wasn't his job. It wasn't his job to make a big move and to get the payroll where it needed to be, you know, they didn't they don't want to become. He was trying to prevent him from being the Royals, Johnny, because he didn't want to continue to plow money into aging stars, right? And so, um, you know, the fact is that they managed the payroll, they managed the talent here, they kept this team, building this team for be good in the years ahead, and you know that you can say it's the Rays model, but that model with the additional investment that this team runs right close to the CBT, that's going to be a really good model for this team. All right, so how do I summarize this? Well, in 2021, if you look at the greatest weaknesses this roster had, what did he do? What did he do to make sure um, that this roster was going to be competitive and win in a position to win championships? The weakest part of this roster last year was the bullpen, and Casey, we'll get to that in the next article. What was the weakest part of the roster was the bullpen and the significant platoon problem this had against left-handed hitting. They also, if a catcher position, they had some challenges there, but they were locked into Maldonado and Castro. Center field, they let Springer go, and they initially made a decision for that 21 season to go with Straw. And then as they saw um, McCormick and Myers progress, they were willing to turn it over, and they made the huge decision at the time to trade Miles Straw, who was actually, we didn't think much of him, but he was a great defensive fielder, and he was actually delivering like seventh or eighth in the league for center fielders in WAR. So um, it seems like they were right in the way they managed center fielder. The starting pitching depth hurt them in the postseason, but there's no reason to think you're going to lose as many pitchers in the postseason as they did last year. And if you do, I don't know that. I mean, I think the 22 Astros are the uniquest team in the history of baseball that could have been able to withstand that sort of onslaught of injuries to their starting pitching. But that was the story of the 21 season, and they took it all the way to the World Series. So here in 22, the biggest challenges for this team were catcher and first base as far as positions. This GM made a significant move to shore up both of those positions, and the manager saw fit to not play those improvements. And those improvements went ice cold because they were being asked to do something. They were being asked to fill in as rookies or part-time players. Both of them are near all stars. This team also had what perceived challenge related to center field. Turns out the team was right about that. I mean, issue with shortstop. Team was right about that. The team stuck with the team. The front office stuck with McCormick. The manager cycled through multiple other players before he finally settled on letting McCormick play. Um, the front office traded away, and almost like forced Dusty to play McCormick. Um, my view on Gurriel during the postseason World Traveler, it wasn't that he flipped a switch. It was actually that he got rest, and you can see that in the Gurriel article on the website. Gurriel with rest throughout the entire season played almost as well as as Tucker, and with additional rest at the schedule you have in the postseason, he just continued that when he was asked and rolled out continually by the manager, on days where there was no rest, back to back days, Gurriel played as poorly or was batted as poorly as Maldonado. And so it's either with rest Gurriel, Tucker; without rest Gurriel, Maldonado. That's the story of the postseason. All right. So overall, what do I say with all that? I think this general manager tried to made improvements for both these two rosters in the 21 and 22 seasons. 2020, I give somewhat a pass because of the unique financial constraints and issues of the COVID year. They still went on a deep run in the postseason, but I think that was more about the team finally getting hot. I believe Click deserves probably a B plus, maybe an A minus, probably 8 out of 10 as far as what he his grade. So my grade for Click would be a B plus. So if Crane does not bring back Click, here's what I think is going to happen. World Traveler, 100%. There's a disconnect between James Click and the manager. Normally, the general manager is the one that's hired the manager and is able to say, "Look, you work for me." That's not what this dynamic and this organism is set up as. So, you know, I put it on the owner that disconnect has been allowed to fester. So, if Crane makes a decision not to bring back Click, which I believe may have already happened because I think the conversation happened today. Click may have told him, "Look, Jim, I'm not coming back. I'm not putting up with this stuff that I put up with. I've already having interviews with. I already have interviews lined up with this team and this team and this team, and I'll take my chances that I can get a GM job with one of them or an assistant GM role." Um, if that happens, I believe this front office, that Jim Crane will hire David Stearns or Sid Medjall, Sid. It was both of those players, both of those men in the front offices were members of the Luno front office era, and I believe that Stearns was the GM, had the GM role for the Milwaukee Brewers, and recently resigned from that role before the end of the year. And then Sige was, the data guru for the Luno front office, and he's been as assistant GM in the Baltimore front office. Those are the two assistant general manager types that I could see Jim Crane going to. If he doesn't do that, then I have vast concerns about what this front office will be and the direction this will go. So, um, when this happens, we'll talk about it. Casey, I don't think so. Casey's asking, is there any possibility of a Luno rehire? I don't think so. But I will say, Jeff Luno has been really, really active on Twitter, more so than I've seen at any point in the last 3 years. He's made comments basically cheerleading this team and this roster somewhat similar to what he would do back in the day when he was the general manager. So, you know, I'd love it. Maybe that's what Jim Crane's up to. But here's what I'm going to tell you. I think these things are going to happen rapidly. And we're going back to, we're gonna hear about some of these free agents. Somebody has got to be at the GM meeting tomorrow. Somebody from this franchise is going to be representing the Astros. I don't know if it's Crane himself or somebody in this front office, but Petula would have been the assistant GM he could have sent and been respected with, but he resigned too this year. So I don't know who's going to the GM meeting representing this team, but we're going to find out something. I guess what I'm trying to tell you is we're going to find something out rapidly, like in the next 48 hours, if not sooner. I mean, like in the next 8 hours. I think something's going to happen. We're going to find out somebody's going to be there representing the Astros. So when we find that out, then maybe the timeline gets expanded. All right, so that's a GM story. Questions about that? Did I answer the questions along the way? Brandon, I think he has, but I don't know that I know that for 100%. Other questions about the GM story? Because we're about to move into the third story. Thanks for sticking with me. I'm going to split these up as we put them out on YouTube. But there's 3 stories that we really wanted to cover here. Yeah, I agree. I agree with your comments, guys.